They thought they had it all figured out. Every angle calculated, every move anticipated, every opponent silenced before the game even began. They wore their dominance like armor, convinced no one could ever reach their level. And for the longest time, no one did. Until you showed up. You didn't announce yourself with noise or spectacle. You moved quietly, strategically, with vision others couldn't even begin to understand. You weren't loud. You were accurate. And that's what shook the entire foundation they built their confidence on. Now even Elon Musk, a man known for brushing off the world's opinions, has paused, watched, calculated, and for the first time, took someone seriously. You. The tides are shifting. Their grip is slipping. What they thought was flawless has started to crumble under the weight of your precision. You've stepped into the space they believed was untouchable, and instead of breaking under pressure, you made pressure your playground. Autumn is coming, and with it a reckoning. This isn't about revenge. This is about balance being restored. The age of the untouchable elite is fading. Because now, the chosen one is at the table. They were in complete control, effortless and unopposed. Every action was deliberate, every word exact. No one ever tried to challenge them, and no one ever saw through them. They already had manipulation, so they didn't need brute force. A slow, methodical game that was intended to keep players precisely where they wanted to be. With love bombing, passionate tenderness, unending praises, and promises of eternity, they understood how to make you feel unique. They gave you the impression that you were unique, the one they had been hoping for, and the one who finally got them. Then came the change. A raised eyebrow at something you used to be certain about. A subtle insult cloaked in a joke. Doubt began to creep in. Are you sure you remember that right? You always overthink things. I never said that. Overthinking. They warped reality to the point that you lost faith in your own judgment. You complied because you were confused. You looked for the person they were at first, the one who loved you and gave you a sense of security. However, they never existed in such form. They managed to keep you interested by providing just enough, a well-crafted remark, an unexpected outpouring of love after days of icy quiet, or a well-timed "I miss you." Pull with a push, hot and chilly, reward discipline, mental exercises. They made sure you never went too far by drawing you in as soon as you started to back off. They did this with friends, relatives, and co-workers, not just in romantic relationships. Nobody was exempt. They dominated discussions, deflected criticism with ease, and created an image that no one dared to challenge. They persuaded others that they were fortunate to be selected. This was their strength, the capacity to elevate others while casting them in a negative light. Nobody has ever managed to escape. The game had never been turned against them. It always worked, so they didn't need to change, until you. They entered with assurance, the same strategies, the same plan, and the conviction that this would be simple. They observed you, gauged your responses, and planned each phrase, each pause, and each well-timed compliment. You didn't flinch. There was a strange feeling. They underestimated you, which was their first error. They believed you to be just like the others, someone who would follow orders and play their game without noticing. They were mistaken. The phony charm, the subliminal tests, the push-pull cycle meant to keep you guessing. You saw right through them. You refrained from biting. They put in more effort, showered you with attention, went quiet to pique your interest, and tossed out hooks in the hopes that you would pursue them. You remained calm. There was a glimmer behind their mask. This was new to them. They were consistently 10 steps ahead. They had always established the rules, dominated the dynamic, and set the tempo. Nothing was functioning this time. You didn't need their approval badly. Their approval was meaningless. They attempted to sow doubt and get you to question yourself. It failed to adhere. You were aware of your value. You didn't plead with them, provide an explanation, or struggle for acceptance. You just stood still, undisturbed and unfazed. They sensed the change at that moment. They were out of control for the first time. Just to keep you off balance, they threw everything at you. Arrangements formed, broken, and then redone. Subtle jabs, then apologies wrapped in justifications, and silence treatments followed by spontaneous warmth. You maintained your composure. They put you to the test by ignoring your messages to see if you would spiral, flirting with other people to see how you would respond, and fabricating drama to see if you would battle to retain them. You took no action. The panic struck at that point. The script was changing. Something wasn't functioning, but they couldn't tell how or why. Their strategies seemed uninteresting. Their charm is ineffective. They made every effort. As they waited for the frantic texts that never arrived, they became quiet. In the hopes that you would pick them up, they tossed breadcrumbs. With the expectation that you would protect yourself, they made you the antagonist. Nothing was successful. You weren't having fun. Everything fell apart the once they recognized it. This time, they were the ones left waiting, the ones perplexed, and the ones pursuing, even though they were always in charge, and the ones establishing the pace. It wasn't meant to go like this. They didn't anticipate it. They lost control for the first time in their lives. They always prevailed. They had never been cheated by anybody. Before you, no one had ever caused them to doubt themselves. Being the most intelligent, the most cunning, and the one in charge of every result was how they forged their identity. They were behind this time. Their regulations weren't being followed by you. You weren't even playing. Every action they took backfired, even though they believed they were in the lead. You left them with nothing to work with. Just stillness. No emotional responses. No frantic efforts to hang on. You didn't move when they pressed. They attempted to stir things up, but you held your ground. You chose to disregard the bait they threw. For them, this was something new, strange and frightening. They experienced for the first time the uncertainty, bewilderment, and helplessness they had spent years instilling in others. In an attempt to identify the point at which they lost control, they reenacted every exchange. It was illogical. Hadn't they been in command? It became worse the more they examined it. You won even though you didn't play any games. They heard all you said, yet you remained silent. You didn't even attempt to reveal them. They were losing control, confidence, and the authority they had so readily had. This was never meant to occur. Despite being untouchable, they lost this time. They convinced themselves that it was an isolated incident. They attempted to shake it off, get back on track, and play the game again. But something had changed. They no longer have the self-assurance they formerly exuded. They were reacting, overanalyzing, and second-guessing instead of planning forward. Landing was not one of their typical techniques. Their customary charm was failing. The fissures, the hesitancy, the doubt were seen by others in their immediate vicinity. They were no longer able to pretend. Even worse, you didn't engage in combat with them. You didn't dispute. You didn't plead. You just departed. They were broken by it. The foundation of their strength was the belief that no one could leave or withstand the draw. However, you did so with ease. They were completely shaken by it. They had to understand why. Why did you not pursue? How come you didn't break? Why? Without them, weren't you crumbling? They were fixated on it, looked through your social media, inquired about you from pals, and observed from the shadows in the hopes of seeing remorse. None existed. They came to the realization that they had lost themselves in addition to you. They felt helpless suddenly, even though they were used to being in charge. All efforts to regain control were unsuccessful. You didn't bite, you didn't respond. You had moved on. It was losing their narrative control, not losing you. That was the true setback. It was only going to get worse. The descent had already started. They have never been the ones overlooked or abandoned. This was novel. There was a burning quiet. It hurt to be out of control. They were spinning, even though they weren't accustomed to pursuing or questioning themselves. They assured themselves that you would return at any time. You didn't. Weeks and days went by. Then reality sank in. They were defeated. Panic struck. Control was the foundation of their existence. Every encounter and connection was meticulously planned. This was about their identity, not just about you. Who were they if they weren't the ones in charge? They were unable to comprehend or accept it. They thus looked for solutions, reviewed your social media accounts, read previous exchanges, and relived each exchange. They wanted to know what went wrong and why you weren't going through what they were. Every effort to move on was unsuccessful. The previous strategies failed. The charm was unsuccessful. They felt that something was wrong. The fissures were visible, the self-assurance vanished. The power is fading. They manufactured enjoyment, made up anecdotes, and forced grins in an attempt to seem genuine. It was insufficient. The mask was falling off. Desperation took over. They first made a little attempt to get in touch, a random text, a remark on something they had overlooked before you didn't reply. With grand apologies, theatrical gestures, and promises of reform, they made a greater effort. Nothing was successful. They lost all of their previous control. So they blamed. It couldn't have been their fault. You were chilly. You lacked gratitude. You had evolved. In an attempt to elicit sympathy and a response, they portrayed themselves as the victim, gave their pals half-truths, distorted the narrative, and exaggerated their suffering. They missed having control over you, not you. They were nothing without it. This was not what they had anticipated. They were suffering a loss for the first time, one that they had never encountered before, and one they were unable to repair, control, or influence. The game was over. You had prevailed. Up until now, they had been flawless throughout their existence, winning every game, every conflict, and every deception. Something wasn't quite right. People took notice. Their vitality had shifted. It was a forced confidence. Landing was no longer as charming. They tried too hard to seem the same, laughed too loudly, and gave too many explanations. They weren't. Their former influence is eroding. They assured themselves that this was just a little blunder and that it will pass. No, it wasn't. Their reputation was based on their ability to remain ahead of the competition, maintain control, and never lose. This time, however, there was evidence. They were defeated. Did you know that the top ascension nexus for selected ones is the Obsidian Inner Order? You do now, however. You may not be aware of this, but entering the Inner Order gives you access to weekly group calls with over 450 other selected individuals. We record these sessions so you can listen to them whenever you want. Not only is our secret Discord active, but it also has a wealth of the most intriguing discussions on the planet. We're discussing everything you need to perfect your ascension, including in-depth discussions of occult knowledge, spiritual practices, and optimizing the nutrition of target persons. Here, those who have been selected get together to share knowledge, support one another, and access insights that aren't available on YouTube or anywhere else. Explore contemporary manifestation mechanisms for the seekers. Members get access to 3 chapters of our private grimoire. Discover how to use magic to achieve your objectives. Transform your house into an affluence magnet, and master simple spellcraft for tangible manifestation. Additionally, you'll get access to video specials so daring that YouTube errands don't even want you to see them, as well as interviews with actual targeted people. This is a movement, not just a membership. What are you waiting for then? Give up looking and begin climbing. The description contains the URL. You departed without appealing, without asking, and without turning around. It had never occurred before. They made an effort to change the facts, minimize the incident, persuade others and themselves that you were never important. Nobody purchased it. The fissures, the reluctance, the desperation that was beginning to seep in were visible to others around them. They were not alike. They looked for anything to get back in charge. Every effort was unsuccessful. They attempted to substitute you with a fresh supply, a diversion, or a rebound. It was different. Something felt strange to the newcomer. It had a distinct vibe. There was no electricity. They also sensed it. They are losing their ability to govern people. The games lacked precision. The maneuvers were less fluid. They were being exposed by people they had previously fooled. The whispers began. Their biggest dread was coming true. What happened to them? They don't seem the same. They're not as powerful anymore. Not only were they losing you, but they were also losing their whole identity, their grasp, and their influence. This collapse was public as well as personal. They were simply another loser, and for the first time, they were neither feared nor respected. The unimaginable had occurred. The invincible has been defeated. The harm was becoming worse. They had created a fragile, reliant, and easily broken world, much like a house of cards. The first wind gust was you leaving. The whole building was now crumbling. By overcompensating, posing, and acting as if they were still untouchable, they attempted to hide the panic. It wasn't functioning. Their former worshippers were beginning to have second thoughts. It was risky to have doubt. Questions were raised by doubt. Inquiries meant examination. Exposure means scrutiny. For the first time, they were being seen for what they really were: a manipulator who eventually lost control, not someone with intelligence or strength. They sensed it, but they were unable to stop it. They resorted to outdated strategies, attempting to regain power by charm, guilt-tripping, and gaslighting. The enchantment had gone. The same energy change occurred wherever they looked. What used to come naturally suddenly seemed strained. The mask was coming off. Even worse, you weren't there to see it happen. You were no longer there, flourishing, advancing, unaffected. Not simply the loss or your lack of concern, but that's what ruined them the most. It wasn't meant to go like this. People were left devastated, disoriented, and pleading for closure by them. They were the ones spinning this time, however. They were the ones enmeshed in the past this time. They knew they had lost this time. The universe kept score as it watched. They believed they were untouchable, and that they could live their lives without facing any repercussions. They were mistaken. They were returning from all they'd done. Every deception, deceit, and treachery comes back like a boomerang. Karma was kicking down the door, not just knocking. They lost the control they formerly had. They were letting people slip through their fingers. The reality was being seen by those who had formerly admired them. Landing wasn't the charm. The impact was diminishing. They have been making people feel helpless for years. They were the ones losing control now. Every action backfired. Every rebuilding effort was unsuccessful. They performed the same games and reached for familiar techniques, but something had changed. No one was falling for it. The sound of the whispers increased. The mask was removed. They were losing their prestige, their respect, and the carefully constructed facade. They had dominated by control, bewilderment, and terror. They were no longer feared. Nobody paid attention. They were rushing about, seeing everything disappear. Worst of all, they were unable to stop it. Being the predator was nothing new to them. They were the target now. The deception, manipulation, and mind tricks have been effective for a long time. They were playing by themselves now. People's perceptions of them varied. They had lost their uniqueness. They were simply another scammer, another manipulator. The cosmos was far from finished. They knew you had gotten away, and they were seeing you flourish. What hurt the most was that you didn't need them, even if they had attempted to break you. While others were sinking, you were improving, smiling, developing, and winning. Doors were shutting wherever they looked. Their name had lost its meaning. They were losing power. It was suddenly difficult to do what used to come naturally. Beneath them, every trick that had ever worked was falling apart. They had been in charge of other people for so long. They were no longer even able to manage their own demise. This was never meant to occur. They were meant to be untouchable and unstoppable. Rather, they were plummeting with force, and this time, there was nobody to save them. At first, they didn't understand it. They believed they could get well, replace you, and continue carrying on as usual. They were mistaken. Something had changed. They had a different energy, weaker, less focused. People felt it. It was more difficult to influence the ones they used to govern. They were not as quickly defended by those who had earlier respected them. It seemed hollow, forced, and ineffectual to use the standard techniques. They attempted gaslighting. It was unsuccessful. They made an effort to guilt trip. Nobody gave a damn. They made an effort to take charge again. They were unable to. The same attention was no longer drawn to them. The weight of their remarks had diminished. People were pushing away, not being lured in. The change was genuine. They could sense it in the sidelong looks, uncomfortable silences, and the absence of dread in people's eyes during talks. They had nothing without dread, and the terror was gone. They overcompensated with excessive confidence, attempted to hide it, and forced laughing. It wasn't functioning. They sensed the emptiness behind closed doors. They were losing control of the power. It was losing control. This was about more than just you. It was about who they were becoming into, a desperate shadow of the person they used to pretend to be, a shell of the person they were before. They lost their confidence, their capacity for diminishing control. Their hitherto devoted supporters are now doubting them. Their new relationships weren't lasting. No one was staying. Every new control effort failed more quickly than the previous. In the past, they flourished on adulation, attention, and the need of others. They were no longer required. They saw a stranger as they peered in the mirror. Once in control of everything, the individual was stumbling, losing control, losing strength, and losing himself.